Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to show you how I painted these figures, which happen to be the 28mm scale Soviet Forward Observation Officers from Warlord games. These have been in my painting queue for quite a while now, as a kind of test for my Soviet infantry, which have not yet been built. Anyway, these are metal figures, and there isn't really any assembly for them, therefore, no assembly video. So I guess I might as well get right to the painting. The figures were primed black. I've forgotten which primer I used exactly, but it's not particularly important. I airbrush on a base coat of Vallejo model colour Russian Uniform WW2, which is a nice short name that rolls right off the tongue. This is done like just about any other base coat, nice and even and multiple thin coats. You don't want to obscure detail by just dumping the paint on. I would usually airbrush on a highlight at this point from directly above, but for whatever reason, I didn't. I started working on these quite a while ago, so I can't remember what my reasoning was. I didn't write it down. Anyway, I decided to add a wash using Army Painter Military Shader, which was slightly diluted with around 1 part water to 2 parts military shader. As always, my mixing ratios are very imprecise. That's just how I roll. I'm applying this to all areas of the uniform. It would be a bit more time consuming to be careful with this, so I'm also getting it on the other bits of the model where it's not needed. They'll all be painted over with different colours, so it doesn't really matter. The application is fairly heavy, but not too heavy. It makes the entire uniform darker, but especially in the recesses and folds. And I feel like that's a good basis for some dry brushing, which comes next. First, I use the base colour, model colour Russian Uniform World War II. Using my makeup brush, I gently dry brush downward to get the colour on the upper areas that would be in sunlight. We're not being so specific as to determine which direction the light is coming from other than above. This is going to be a pretty simple paint job after all. I then apply another lighter dry brush with a mix of roughly 1 part model colour buff to 3 parts of the Russian uniform. This is applied in the same way as the previous dry brushing, only I'm being a bit more careful and applying less of the colour to the model. I feel like it's worked well. I like how the edges of the uniform have a highlight to them, and doing it this way is much quicker and easier than painting those details in with a regular brush. I left that to sit for a while, not being entirely sure that I was satisfied. Then I decided that these are fine and I really just want to get them done, so I moved on and painted the skin. I base coated the skin on all the figures using Ammo By Mig Burnt Sand, which I got from the Ammo Flesh Tones set, because for flesh that seemed like as good a choice as any. I'm obviously being careful to only paint the skin with this. Ideally I could do this all messy and use some dry brushing as well, but unless you mask things, which seems kind of tedious, you can only really choose one thing to do dry brushing on and get things done in a quick manner. I chose the uniforms. Made sense to me. Next, I apply the warm skin tone from the same set. I'm trying to put this in areas where I think the skin would be a bit lighter. Upper areas like the top of the nose, cheekbones, and the chin. I'm trying to be neat, but I'm not too worried about precision. These are intended as gaming pieces, and I'm painting them with the arm's length rule. I'm not sure if that's got a better name. I hold the models at arm's length, and if it looks good, that's the level of detail I go with. If it looks good even closer than that, that's also good, but it's a bonus and not the goal. I apply light skin tone as a third colour here, and this went on pretty much the same as the previous colour, just a little bit lighter. I'm clearly not the best at painting skin, but this looks alright. I figured it could do with a wash though, so I applied some Army Painter skin tone. This was diluted about 1 part water to 3 parts skin tone. Like with the uniform, I like to leave this sort of thing to sit for a while before I make any changes, just to see how I like it. It is always possible to make changes, but in this case I didn't feel any were necessary. Now it's time for the rest of the stuff. I'm more or less just going to go with whatever colours I think look good here.
But what about historical accuracy, Herbert?
Shh. Be quiet. I painted the belts, the ones around the waist, with Vallejo model colour chocolate brown. I also painted the one gun strap that I could see with this colour. Then, a highlight. I added a tiny bit of model colour buff to the chocolate brown. I apply this to the strap and belts, mostly along an edge. It doesn't make a huge difference, but it does do something. Next I figured, why not paint the map? For this I used Vallejo model color Ivory. This is a little bit more white than I wanted, but I'd already started so I just went with it, and it will work well enough anyway. Because this is pretty much white, it does take a couple of coats to get a good solid coverage. Obviously I'm being quite careful when applying this so that I don't paint the skin or uniform. Mistakes can be fixed of course, but it's much quicker to be careful the first time, even if you're going slowly. Next I used some ammo by Mig red leather from the Skin Tones set, but instead of painting skin, I'm going to use it on some straps, which I assume are leather and therefore a sort of skin, kind of. Not only am I doing the straps, but the bags or satchels or whatever you want to call them that said straps are attached to. This colour stands out quite a lot, which I don't think is really a bad thing, but they will be toned down a bit with a wash later on. I've also used this colour on the pistol holster that the flag lady has. Obviously I'm being careful with this to only paint the straps and bags and holster. For the straps this isn't too tricky. They're sort of raised away from the uniform, which makes it quite easy to do neatly. The edges where the bags and holster are against the uniform is the tricky bit, but as the kids are always saying, slow and steady wins the race. I also use this colour on the chin straps for the figures with helmets. This is quite a small thing to paint, so it's a bit fiddly because of that, but obviously, it's not impossible. I figured this bag looking thing was also a bag, so I painted it the same colour as the others. And then, continuing with the same colour, I paint this strap thing on the map. Again, I'm being careful not to paint the map. I didn't really feel like doing any corrections. Time for hair. Only the woman has obvious hair, and I decided to base this with Vallejo model colour gold and yellow. I'm just carefully painting all the hair bits that I could reach. The helmet still hasn't been painted, so I'm not too worried about that at the moment, but this would be annoying to get onto the uniform. Also, I wasn't really sure if this was going to look any good, but I figured why not try. I added a light highlight with model colour light yellow. These colours are really quite bright, so I used some Army Painter Strong Tone. I am trying to hold off on using the washes until later, so I can do all the areas that use one colour at the same time, but I wanted to see how this would work, just in case I needed to redo it. I did end up being reasonably satisfied with it. I painted the small areas that might be hair on the map guy with model colour chocolate brown. I'm just going to pretend that the Ushanka hat guy has no hair, or maybe it's just really dark and will be hidden by the colour of the hat. Either way works for me. I take some model colour Mahogany Brown and use it to paint the wooden parts of the guns. There's only 2 guns here, and they are both different, but I figured using the same colour for both of them would be fine. Nothing too tricky here, just as with pretty much all of the other stuff, I'm being careful to avoid painting anything but the areas I want to be this colour. I then paint this little pouchy boxy looking thing with model colour Beige Brown. I don't know what this thing is for, I don't know what any of the bags or pouches are for, but this one is probably for snacks. I used the same colour for this little pouch on the map guy, even though it's probably barely going to be visible. Still, even if it can barely be seen, it does add a bit of interest. Why not do the helmets next? For these I'm using Vallejo model colour Uniform Green. Whose uniform is it? It doesn't say. I often see Soviet infantry with helmets a colour like this, which is significantly different to their uniforms. It looks interesting, but it also stands out quite a lot. I'm being extra careful here to avoid getting the green on the skin. Because of all the different layers, the skin would be more annoying to do corrections on. I use the same colour to paint the canteen on the map guy. And on the radio box. Phone box? I don't know what the proper name for this is, it's probably a radio, not a phone. Either way, I've painted this uniform green. I've applied the green around the edges of the open box here, but left the insides black. I'm not sure if it should be black in there, but I didn't really feel like putting too much effort into this box. So I move on to the boots. I painted these with black Stynel Res Primer, because the only other black I have is Model Air Black, and this primer, unsurprisingly, just covers better in a single coat. Doing this is simple enough. You just paint the bits that are boot, and don't paint the bits that aren't boot. I also use this to paint the inside of the radio box, just to make sure there aren't any specks of green or other colours. I also carefully paint the cable that runs up the guy's leg, and the phone handset, obviously, again, taking care not to make mistakes. I'm probably going to say that a lot, aren't I?
You already have!
Well, I'm going to keep doing it. Like with the binoculars here. Be careful not to paint the hands or the face. Slow and steady wins the race. You could be extra fancy and add some metallic colours or something like that to the binocular lenses, but I didn't feel like doing that, so I didn't. I then add a highlight, using model colour German Grey. This is very subtle, which was kind of the point, though maybe it's a little bit too subtle. I applied a bit on the binoculars, some on the radio cable and handset, and then I dry brush it onto the boots. It is there, and I can see it in person, I'm just not sure how well it shows up on camera. I guess I could add more of this, or maybe a slightly lighter grey to make it a bit more obvious, but I do like the subtle effect, so I've left it how it is. Next, I bust out the Scale 75 black metal, which I've really been liking for metallic stuff. I paint the obvious metal things like the gun parts, and it works very well for these, though in my opinion it is a little bit light and does need a wash, but that'll come later. I also use this to add some metal, obviously, to the latch plates and strap plates on the box. I'm not quite sure if these should be a silvery shiny colour, but they are now. I also use this to paint various things around the figures like buckles on belts and bags and buttons and things like that. There's not a lot, it's just some little bits here and there to add a bit of interest. I also paint this thing here on the map, which might be a compass, I'm not sure. Say it with me, I'm being careful not to put the paint in places that I don't want it. Next, on the map guy, I use model colour US Field Drab to paint his leggy things. Gaiters, if you want a less technical term. Leggy things is the proper word. I use the same colour to paint the straps on the radio because why not, and they're obviously visible right now, but once the models are based this might be less visible because of long grass or snow or dirt or something. The way I see it, unless you're totally sure it's not going to be visible, you should still make it look as neat as you can. At this point, I decided to add a little detail to the map. I used my black primer and a fine brush and just did a little X marks the spot sort of thing.
Is this a treasure map or something?
Sure, why not? You won't be surprised to learn that I've got no idea how the maps these guys would be using should look, and I wanted something simple, just so that it wasn't a plain blank map. Of course, you can spend as much time as you like on your own map if you're painting one of these. I didn't want to put that much effort into it, and this is good enough if you're looking at it from a distance. Next, the flags. I base coated them with model colour red, nothing too fancy here. I did have to do a couple of coats of this to get a good solid coverage. I'm not really sure if these should be red, but it makes sense to me. It would be nice and visible, which is probably the point of signal flags. Once the base coat is opaque enough, I use model colour Carmine Red and, not particularly carefully, apply it to the raised areas of the flag. I would have preferred to do a dry brushing here, but I would have definitely ruined the skin on the hands. Anyway, the result is pretty subtle, but that's what I like. Next, I paint the Ushanka hat. I wasn't totally sure how to go about this, I've never painted one before, but I started by base coating it with model colour German Grey. I figured a nice dark colour was the best starting point. As with before, I'm being quite careful to avoid painting the skin grey. I follow this with a sort of stippling, almost dry brushing, with model colour Basalt Grey. I'm basically trying to get this on some of the raised areas in a kind of patchy manner. Then, because I often see these with a browny colour in them, I did the same thing with model colour Chocolate Brown. This doesn't really stand out too much, so I did it again with model colour Beige Brown. Just doing the same thing again, but a little bit lighter. I think that's alright. It doesn't jump right out at you, it's nice and subtle, and it's certainly more interesting than just painting it one single colour. I'm sure I'll have to do at least a couple more of these when I get to the rest of my Soviet infantry in about 30 years, so that'll be a chance to reiterate on this, or do the same thing again. Who can say? Back to the flags. I was happy enough with the red, so it's time for the wash, which is also red. In fact, it's Army Painter red tone. This is undiluted straight out of the bottle, and because it's so liquidy, extra care should be taken around the hands. This is pretty simple, I just want to get it in the folds of the flag to add some depth. Next, I take some Army Painter light tone and apply it to the map. This seems like a pretty good colour for this kind of thing. I'm applying it in a sort of patchy, inconsistent way, which certainly makes it look like a treasure map. I guess this is a bit more piratey than World War II era Soviet, but I think it looks cool and it's kind of fun, so why not? I also use the light tone on the helmets. I'm trying not to go too heavily with it, I just wanted to add a sort of dirty look, and maybe a little bit of darkness in the gentle angle above the rim. I also applied it to the canteen because why not? And to be consistent with the rest of the uniform green, I applied it to the radio box as well. I thought to myself, you know, this might add a nice touch to the Ushanka hat, so I put it there too. And because of reasons, I put it on the flag lady's gun holster as well, and the map guy's gaiters. This is why I've saved these washes until now. In my opinion, it's better to do all of these at once, rather than immediately after putting the base colours on. I mean, doing it either way is perfectly valid, but doing it this way saves, well, not a lot of time, but a bit of time, and can prevent some wastage. Next, Army Painter Strong Tone. Again, this is undiluted. I apply this to the wooden parts of the guns and the various straps like on the radio box. I also put this on the bags connected to those straps, because I figured it's good to be consistent, and I also put some of it in the face of the, well, I'm assuming it's a compass, so I've put a bit of Strong Tone in there to make it darker and more compass-like. I also hit the helmet straps with it. You don't have to be super careful here, just a little bit careful. Getting this along the edges of things like straps is helpful and provides a bit of shadow there. It can also hide some of the less than perfectly painted areas between the different colours. Next, Army Painter Dark Tone. I use this to darken down the metal parts of the guns. They're a little bit too silvery for my tastes, and this works well to take care of that. I also hit the radio box. The idea there is to make it look a bit darker and more dirty, because I would imagine those don't stay clean for too long. I also carefully put this in the figures' mouths. This is just to give them a bit of depth. Same with the eyes. Some people like to put a lot of effort into painting the eyes on their figures, but I'm not one of them. They're not really going to be noticeable on the gaming table, and they often look bad and way too big, especially when I try to do it. So this dark tone should add enough shadow to create the illusion of eyes. I also use this to add shadow in various areas around the model, mostly where different colours are next to each other, but also where I think there should be shadows. Areas like where the hands come out of the sleeves. I also added some to the compass thing, and along the edges where the map guy's arm and hands are against the map. Also where the flag lady's hands are holding the flag. This is a nice, simple and quick way to add shadows and maybe hide some of those imperfections. There are people who consider this cheating somehow, but I think the idea that you can cheat in painting models for yourself is a really bizarre concept. But I guess people are going to think whatever dumb things they want to think, so I would suggest using whatever techniques you like, and whatever works for you. Anyway, after a coat of Ammo Lucky Matte Varnish, the 28mm scale Soviet Forward Observation Officers by Warlord Games are now completed. Overall, I'm fairly happy with them, and I think I did a reasonable job. The colour of the uniform is probably a little bit dark for Soviets though. I don't really mind, but I was expecting the matte varnish to lighten everything just a little bit more than it did. So it might not be exactly what I wanted, but I still think it looks good. And anybody who says that Soviet uniforms were all an exact consistent colour is probably on drugs anyway. And if it is a problem, we can make up a story. We can say maybe these uniforms came from a factory that dyed things a bit too dark on one occasion, or they could be dirty, or maybe even wet, or under some odd lighting conditions. Who can say? If you've been around here for a while, you probably know that painting figures is not really my favourite thing, though I didn't hate doing this. It was actually pretty fun and relaxing a lot of the time. Maybe because I only did 3 figures instead of a whole horde of them, but it was enjoyable. I'm still not 100% on the skin tone, but I think I'm getting closer to something I like. It's not something I plan to exhaustively work on, I'll just try something a bit different next time I paint a figure, which will probably be more Soviets. This was kind of intended as a testbed of sorts for my Soviet army, and the Forward Observation Officers are their own little thing, so maybe it's totally fine if their uniforms won't match. Obviously I've not put these figures on bases yet, and I don't plan on doing that until way in the future when I've painted the rest of the Soviet infantry I have. The reason for that is to make the bases consistent. I'm sure I could replicate whatever it is I do, but it is easier just to do them all at once. Also, I've got no idea what I want to do as far as basing goes yet, so better to just leave that for later and get this video done. Speaking of this video, it's not really intended as a how-to, more of a how I did it, but if you like the colours I've used, there's a list of them in the description below. Do with that information what you will. Not much more to say about these really, other than it feels good to finally finish them. They have been in my painting queue for a while now. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. And if you've not already done so, why not subscribe here on YouTube? All it's going to cost you is absolutely nothing. Or, if you have the means and you want to help a Erpaderp do Erpaderp things, like putting paint on things, and also see my videos a bit early, consider becoming a patron. For as little as $1 a month, you can help a Erpaderp not die. You can find links to Patreon and all of my other things like Discord and social media in the description below. And, as always, I shall return soon. So until then, be excellent to each other, have an amazing day, and thanks for watching. Farewell.